Hey everyone, Trevor Noah here. So remember when everyone was freaking out about a trade war? Yeah, that's happening. Turns out slapping tariffs on everything isn't exactly the best way to make friends in the global economy. Who knew, right? It all started with President Trump deciding that other countries were playing dirty when it came to trade. He argued they were taking advantage of the US by selling their goods cheaply and putting American workers at a disadvantage. His solution? Tariffs, of course. Now, tariffs are basically taxes on imported goods. The idea is to make foreign products more expensive, encouraging people to buy American-made stuff instead. Sounds good in theory, but in reality, it's a bit more complicated. The Trump administration slapped tariffs on a whole bunch of goods, from steel and aluminum to solar panels and washing machines. And guess what? Other countries weren't too thrilled about it. They retaliated with their own tariffs on American goods, leading to a tit-for-tat escalation. Suddenly, American farmers, manufacturers, and consumers found themselves caught in the crossfire. Farmers, for instance, saw their exports plummet as countries like China imposed tariffs on American soybeans and pork. Manufacturers faced higher costs for imported materials, making it harder to compete both domestically and internationally. And consumers? Well, they started to feel the pinch as prices for everyday items began to rise. The ripple effects of the trade war were felt far and wide, impacting not just the US but the global economy. Economists warned that prolonged trade tensions could lead to slower economic growth and even a potential recession. Businesses uncertain about future trade policies began to hold back on investments and hiring. The uncertainty created a climate of fear and hesitation, affecting job markets and economic stability. So, while the idea of protecting American jobs and industries sounded appealing, the execution proved to be far more complex and challenging. The trade war became a hot topic of debate, with opinions divided on its effectiveness and long-term consequences. Some argued it was a necessary move to level the playing field, while others believed it did more harm than good. In the end, the trade war highlighted the intricate and interconnected nature of the global economy. It served as a reminder that actions taken by one country can have far-reaching impacts on others. As the world watched and waited, the hope was for a resolution that would bring stability and growth for all. Only time would tell how this trade war would shape the future of international trade and relations. Until then, we could only brace ourselves for the next chapter in this unfolding economic saga. Thanks for tuning in and stay informed. This is Trevor Noah signing off. Remember that old saying, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind? It's a timeless piece of wisdom that warns against the dangers of retaliation and revenge. Yet, in the complex world of international trade and politics, it seems this lesson has been forgotten. Well, it seems like someone forgot to tell that to the rest of the world. The global stage has become a battleground where nations are quick to retaliate against perceived slights and economic threats. As soon as the US started throwing tariff punches, everyone else started swinging back. It was as if a signal had been sent out, and the rest of the world responded in kind, ready to defend their economic interests. The European Union, China, Canada, Mexico, you name it, they retaliated with tariffs of their own. Each country targeted specific industries and products, aiming to hit where it would hurt the most. The EU, for instance, targeted iconic American products like Harley-Davidson motorcycles and bourbon whiskey. These are not just any products, they are symbols of American culture and industry. China went after soybeans and pork, aiming right at Trump's voter base in the American heartland. By targeting these agricultural products, China knew it would create significant economic and political pressure. This tit-for-tat tariff battle quickly escalated into a full-blown trade war. What started as a series of isolated skirmishes soon became a global conflict affecting markets and economies around the world. And just like in a real war, there are casualties. The difference here is that the casualties are not soldiers on a battlefield, but rather the economic well-being of nations and the livelihoods of ordinary people. Unfortunately, in this case, it's not soldiers on a battlefield, but everyday people, consumers, businesses, and farmers who are feeling the pain. Prices for everyday goods have risen, small businesses are struggling to stay afloat, and farmers are facing uncertain futures. The ripple effects of this trade war are far-reaching, impacting not just the economies of the countries involved, but the global economy as a whole. It's a stark reminder of how interconnected our world has become, and how actions in one part of the globe can have profound consequences elsewhere. So, Who's really feeling the heat from this trade war? Well, it's not the politicians in their ivory towers, that's for sure. It's ordinary people like you and me who are left footing the bill. Remember those tariffs on washing machines? Yeah, they led to higher prices for consumers. And those tariffs on steel and aluminum? They made it more expensive for businesses to produce goods, which, you guessed it, also led to higher prices for consumers. But it's not just about higher prices. The trade war also created uncertainty in the global economy. Businesses became hesitant to invest and hire, worried about what the future holds. And farmers, who rely heavily on exports, saw their markets disappear overnight. Let's talk about those higher prices for a second. Remember that new washing machine you were saving up for? Well, thanks to tariffs, it just got a whole lot more expensive. And that's not all. Those tariffs on steel and aluminum, they're making everything from cars to beer cans more expensive too. See, when businesses have to pay more for the materials they need, they pass those costs on to us, the consumers. So even if you're not buying imported goods directly, you're still feeling the pinch of those tariffs in your wallet. Section 5. Stuck in the middle. American businesses caught in the crossfire. It's not just consumers who are hurting. American businesses are caught in the crossfire of this trade war. On one hand, they're facing higher costs for imported materials because of tariffs. On the other hand, their exports are being targeted by retaliatory tariffs from other countries. Imagine you're a small business owner who makes furniture. You rely on imported wood to make your products, but those imports are now more expensive because of tariffs. To make matters worse, your biggest export market, say the EU, just slapped tariffs on your furniture. You're squeezed from both sides, and it's getting harder and harder to stay afloat. And then, there are the farmers. American farmers rely heavily on exports, especially to China. But when China slapped tariffs on soybeans, pork, and other agricultural products, it dealt a devastating blow to the American heartland. Suddenly, farmers who had invested heavily in their crops were left with mountains of unsold produce. Prices plummeted, and many farmers struggled to stay afloat. The Trump administration tried to help with subsidies and aid packages, but for many, it wasn't enough to offset their losses. So what does the future hold for this trade war? The situation is complex and multifaceted, with numerous potential outcomes that could shape the global economy in significant ways. Well, there are a few possible scenarios. Each scenario carries its own set of implications and challenges, affecting not just the countries directly involved, but also the global market and everyday consumers. One possibility is that things continue to escalate. This could happen if neither side is willing to back down and both continue to impose more tariffs and trade barriers. The United States and its trading partners could keep slapping on more tariffs, targeting a wider range of goods and services. This tit-for-tat strategy could spiral out of control, leading to a full-blown global trade war. The consequences of such an escalation would be severe, potentially causing widespread economic disruption. This would be bad news for everyone, as it would disrupt global supply chains, stifle economic growth, and create uncertainty in the markets. The disruption of global supply chains would mean that businesses could struggle to get the materials they need, leading to production delays and increased costs, and lead to even higher prices for consumers. Everyday items could become more expensive, putting a strain on household budgets and reducing consumer spending. Another possibility is that the two sides come to the negotiating table. This would involve both parties engaging in dialogue to find a mutually beneficial solution, and try to work out a deal. Successful negotiations could lead to the removal of tariffs and the restoration of more favorable trade conditions. This would be the ideal outcome, as it would help to stabilize the global economy and restore confidence among investors and consumers. But it requires both sides to be willing to compromise. Achieving a balanced agreement would necessitate concessions from both parties, which can be challenging given the current political climate. And given the current political climate, that's far from certain. Domestic pressures and political agendas can make it difficult for leaders to reach a consensus. Finally, there's the possibility of a stalemate, where neither side is willing to back down, but they also don't escalate things further. This scenario would result in a prolonged period of uncertainty, with existing tariffs remaining in place and no clear resolution in sight. But they also don't escalate things further. This would mean a continuation of the status quo, with ongoing economic strain and uncertainty. This would mean living with the current tariffs and their negative consequences for the foreseeable future. Businesses and consumers would have to adapt to the new normal, finding ways to mitigate the impact of the tariffs. The economic consequences could be long-lasting, affecting everything from job markets to consumer prices. In the end, the path forward remains uncertain, and the world watches closely to see what unfolds next. President Trump has often touted his skills as a negotiator, claiming he can get the best deals for America. But when it comes to trade, it seems like his strategy of tariffs and confrontation has backfired. Instead of securing better trade deals, he's sparked a trade war that's hurting American businesses, farmers, and consumers. Some argue that the pain is worth it, that the United States needs to stand up to its trading partners and fight for a better deal. Others believe that the trade war is a losing gamble, that the costs far outweigh any potential benefits. So, what's the solution? Well, as with most things in life, talking is usually a good place to start. Instead of resorting to tariffs and threats, the United States should engage in meaningful negotiations with its trading partners. This means listening to their concerns, understanding their perspectives, and being willing to compromise. It's time to put aside the rhetoric of winning and losing and focus on finding solutions that benefit everyone. After all, in a globalized world, we're all interconnected. When one country suffers, the rest of us feel the pain too. So let's hope that cooler heads prevail and that we can find a way out of this trade war before it's too late. That's it for me, folks. Stay tuned for more news and analysis from The Daily Show.